So welcome everyone to our second in our Dark Sky Dialogues. This is a conversation with really leaders in the dark sky movement from around the world, people who are giving their all to change the landscape of the night and protect the night from light pollution. I'm Ruskin Hartley. I'm the Executive Director of the International Dark Sky Association. And I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. We couldn't do this type of work without the support of our members and supporters around the world. So thank you, a heartfelt thanks for everything you do to enable us to support you in doing this work. It's July 16th here in the US, but I'm kind of jealous because our guest is joining us from New Zealand, where it's already Friday, July the 17th. We're joined today by Nalayini Brito. She's an economist, she's an astronomer, and she's a passionate dark sky advocate. I met her and her husband Gareth when I traveled to New Zealand last year to join the Starlight conference held in Tekabo. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Now, amid the crazy role of organizing that conference, anyone who's organized a conference knows what that takes. Nalayini managed to take time to arrange introductions to myself and my colleague Adam to other people working on these issues in New Zealand. And in fact, she opened her home to myself and Adam was our taxi from the airport. So thank you for all of that, Nalayini. And thank you for joining us today. You know, I was struck when I was down there by the growing dark sky movement in New Zealand. How it's taking root across the country and how it's being led by this groundswell of grassroots support and taking a really entrepreneurial approach for this. And that's really why I wanted to invite Nalayini today to join us. As we'll talk, she grew up in Sri Lanka. She spent time like me in the Middle East. And she has, like me, has a home in the United Kingdom. My home's my parents', but I count that as my home, and she has a home there. And we also both like a good game of rugby and can talk a little bit about cricket, although I'm definitely no expert. So, so thank you. I'm delighted to welcome Nalayini to share some of her thoughts. Thank you, Nalayini. Welcome.
My pleasure.
Good, good. When we were talking the other day, Nalayini, we took it all the way back to the beginning, and maybe you could start by sharing some of your experiences growing up in Sri Lanka. And really how that sets you on this lifelong journey that brings you to this conversation here today.
It's not so much growing up in Sri Lanka as much as my grandfather. He was a science teacher. He was a headmaster of his school when he retired, and he lived with us. So there were certain special astronomical phenomena which I got to experience as a child because of him. And the two that I still remember quite clearly was waking up around 4 a.m. one morning to see a naked eye comet. It's the best comet I've ever seen naked eye. And the second one was a solar eclipse. I still remember he had a pool of water in a large basin on the ground, and we had to look at the reflection and looking at it through negatives of photographs so that our eyes didn't get damaged. So I actually experienced a total solar eclipse as a child. And so these are things that actually gave me a peek into the universe. So that has always fascinated me, and I've sort of carried that interest with me all my life.
It's a story here so often, Nalayini, how people's those early experiences, often with a family member, often actually with a grandparent, here in the dark sky movement, have brought people, and they carry those impressions and those memories with them around the world. It was very similar in my prior role when I was working on redwood issues, the number of people who had their first experience in a redwood forest in the hands of a grandfather or a grandmother taking them for a walk in the forest. It's so similar, those early passions. But you didn't start off as an astronomer or a dark sky. You moved into the field of being an economist. Maybe share a little bit about that, Nalayini, because I think that's really helped shape some of the work you're doing at the moment as well.
So my professional career was, I qualified as a chartered accountant, and then I did an MBA quite early in my life at London Business School, which was ranked #2 in the world at the time. And then I went into banking. I picked up a financial postgraduate diploma in banking from the Institute of Bankers, the UK. And I worked for decades in banking, or not decades, but more, 15 years or so. And I was an investment banker. So that was my professional career, very much in the thick of the private sector. And then at some stage, I pulled out and got into international development consulting. I was influenced by my husband, Gareth, and he was already in that field, sort of just, so we've been doing international development consulting for the last 15 or 20 years. And ours is an award-winning company. It's just owned and operated by the two of us. We've won the New Zealand prestigious award, and we have worked in 35 countries now with 250 projects. So that's what we do sort of for a day job. That's my professional career.
So one of those countries you've worked in is a country that I've also spent a little bit of time in. So when I was in the Middle East, I was living in Kuwait, and every time my visa ran out, we had to take the short flight down to Bahrain to renew it. And so I know you also spent a little bit of time in Bahrain, and maybe we pick up the story about what brings you to the dark sky movement there.
Yeah, so when I lived in Bahrain, that was the time of the Halley's Comet. So I wanted to see the comet because there was so much publicity about it, etc. But I didn't know how to set about it. So I actually ordered a telescope. That was my first telescope from, you will know this, Ruskin, Argos. That was the name of the company.
Oh yeah, the catalog.
Yes, so I ordered it from Argos. It arrived. And then I realized I didn't know how to use it. And I really didn't know how to find my way in the sky. So I actually placed a small advertisement in the local paper saying, I got a telescope. I like to look at the Halley's Comet, anyone interested? And I hit upon an astronomer who was living in Bahrain. He knew his way about the sky and the telescope, but he didn't have one. So we met regularly. I had a rooftop garden, and we used to look at the Halley's Comet. So that was my first experience of owning a telescope and using it and learning to sort of navigate in the sky. And from Bahrain, I came to New Zealand, and that was a good 30 years ago. And almost the first thing I did was join the Auckland Astronomical Society. And the very next birthday, I had my own telescope. Not that I used it much, but I had one. I've owned one ever since.
Yeah. Now you also make your home part of the time in the UK, right? And I think Gareth is. I can tell from his accent he's actually from Wales. He's not really from the United Kingdom. No, he's a proud Welshman. I know that, and I think that's really kind of maybe the next part of the story here is kind of your exploration of what brings you here.
Yes. So Gareth is he's Welsh, and as you know, they have very strong affinity to being Welsh. So when his parents, left Wales to move in with his sister in England, Gareth felt quite lost because he had sort of lost his so-called roots in Wales. So we bought a place in a town called Hay-on-Wye. It's very famous for the Hay Festival. And so that's only about 35 minutes from his hometown, which is a rough valleys town called Merthyr Tydfil. Oh. So he didn't particularly want to go and live there. So we bought this little cottage in Hay-on-Wye, and that was a good 18 years ago. And we go there. It's actually inside the Brecon Beacons National Park, which is a dark sky reserve. But at the time we bought the cottage, it hadn't become a dark sky reserve. That happened subsequently. And we go there every year. We spend months there and go to the festival, and then enjoy being in Wales.
So I think if I do this right, hopefully I can navigate all of this, but we have a quick photo that we can share with people of the Brecon Beacons National Park. I think it's an absolutely beautiful spot in the world. If I can get this to work. Where is my zoom? There. Sorry, everyone. So this is, there we are. there's the Brecon Beacons National Park. Now that interesting thing is it could also be New Zealand, right, with the sheep in the foreground and the mountains in the background.
That's right.
So one of the images you shared with me, Nalayini, was this one, which is when you started really to dive in a little bit more into this whole issue about the dark sky movement and what was going on here.
Yeah, so I got interested in dark skies. My astronomy hobby led me to do a master's degree in astronomy, which I completed a few years ago. And around that time, Fabio Falchi's New World Atlas came out. And that really shocked me because I was stunned to find a third of humanity can't see the Milky Way anymore. 60% of the people in Europe, 80% of the people in North America can't see it. So the statistics stunned me because Milky Way was always in my life, right? And in New Zealand, you got to just travel a maximum of half an hour drive and then you can see the Milky Way. So that's what got me interested. And then I got involved with Great Barrier Island Dark Sky Sanctuary. And then at some stage, when we were in the UK, there was the International Dark Sky Conference in Galloway. And I attended the conference, met up with all these dark sky people in the UK. And then I just this was my first piece of research comparing UK and New Zealand. And it was quite stunning. You can see, relatively speaking, how dark New Zealand is compared to the UK. And yet the UK had 11 dark sky pockets, whereas New Zealand at that time had just Aoraki Mackenzie and Great Barrier Island, which I was instrumental in creating. So that became, it became quite obvious. And I did further research, and one of the things I say, which the Australians don't much like, is Australia and New Zealand are the two darkest countries in the developed world. Australia is much darker than New Zealand, but people don't go to their dark sky places because it's right in the middle, it's not populated, and it's not friendly. Whereas the entire country is very accessible. So my belief is New Zealand is a dark sky country that's so easily accessible to people, which hadn't protected, even though we have them, we haven't actually protected them for the future. And this is where IDA comes in. I felt IDA offered a country like New Zealand the opportunity to protect its dark skies, which it values, but it hasn't sort of protected for the future.
Yeah. I mean, I found these graphics that you put forward so informative. I mean, the population, the area of both countries are relatively similar. Clearly, the population is vastly different. You know, it is a fraction of the number in the UK, in New Zealand as in the UK. And yet in the UK, you can still find pockets of dark places. In fact, my parents live in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, which is pursuing International Dark Sky Reserve status at the moment. So it does show you that even though you can have a country with a high population, you can still find those pockets of darkness that are worthy of protecting. As opposed to, as you said, the map on the right, where vast tracts of New Zealand are unpopulated and de facto dark. But interestingly, some of the work that's been done that we can look at is actually on the outskirts of the city. So you have these international dark sky reserves and sanctuaries that are accessible from some of the largest cities in New Zealand at this time.
So there are currently close to 20 places in New Zealand that are aspiring to become dark skies. So the concept really caught on, and they're all working at their own pace.
So the next photo we want to give, orientate people a little bit to New Zealand here and some of the places that we're going to be visiting. So this is up with Auckland, up in the top, you can see the Great Aotea, Great Barrier Island, which Nalayini will share a little bit about the story about how that became accredited. And that was one of the places that you kindly introduced me to. And maybe this is the southern sky off the Great Barrier Island last fall. Maybe just talk a little bit about the southern sky for those of us who might not have seen it, Nalayini, because it's pretty spectacular when you see it for the first time.
Yeah, it is a stunning night sky, the southern night sky. We are just blessed. It's the only place where you can see all three naked eye galaxies. So that's in that picture, that's the large Magellanic Cloud and the small Magellanic Cloud. They are naked eye galaxies. And as I said, if you drive out of any place in New Zealand, a maximum of 30 minutes, most of the time you don't have to drive out. You just go to your backyard. We have a holiday home on Waiheke Island, and I just step onto the balcony, and you can see on a dark night, you can see the Milky Way, and you can see the two naked eye galaxies. Andromeda is not as spectacular in New Zealand as in the UK. It's a sort of a fuzzy blob, but you can see it at certain times of the year. So these are two striking things. The other one is Omega Centauri, which is a globular cluster, which is the most glorious globular cluster. You can see it naked eye like a little star, but it is really spectacular through, ideally through a telescope or a pair of binoculars. And these are all circumpolar objects. So they are in our sky right round the year. So any time of the year, you can see them. Not to mention the Southern Cross, which is it's the smallest constellation in the sky, but it's a very striking constellation. And it's on our national flag. It's on the Australian national flag. It's on the national flag of some Pacific Islands, Brazil. So it's a very striking constellation. And also there is the Pacific history. Most of the Pacific Islands, including New Zealand, was occupied by Polynesian navigators. They were the first to discover them and sort of occupy them. And they used this because the Southern Cross, there are 4 of the 10 brightest stars in the sky, and the pointers, Alpha Centauri and Beta Centauri. Alpha Centauri is the closest star to the sky. So the southern sky played a big role, especially the circumpolar objects.
When I was down visiting New Zealand, I spent some time with some of the Maori out there, and some of they're kind of relearning their celestial navigation skills. So this growing movement to protect the night sky has that very strong cultural aspect, which was really inspiring when I was down there. In fact, one of the navigators had navigated all the way up to Hawaii and then on to San Francisco a number of years ago, certainly using the stars to get to Hawaii, because then they lost the traditional knowledge at that point when they got into the northern hemisphere. So I'll stop sharing this now, Nalayini, but maybe, I know you were instrumental in kind of getting Great Barrier Island into the International Dark Sky Park system, and I'd love for you maybe to share a little bit about that story, because time and again we find that many of these great places that have been protected, they have a small number of individuals who are motivated and give their time and energy and their passion to protect those special values over time. So I'd love you to share a little bit about the story about this pretty special place and where it's located so close to Auckland.
So once I got involved with dark skies, or interested in dark skies, I was measuring up darkness within my sphere, within Auckland. So I had a little sky quality meter, I'd measure up, etc. And then we have a holiday home on Waiheke Island, and that's dark. I mean, they're aspiring to become a dark sky park. So when I was there, it suddenly struck me, if Waiheke is this dark, Great Barrier Island, which is further away from the city, less populated, and had no street lights, is likely to be darker. So I decided to go there. I had never been there before, to measure it up. So a friend of mine knew someone on the island. I contacted them and said, I'd like to come over and measure the dark skies. It's new moon in a couple of days. And I would like someone to show me, tell me something about the roading system, where to go and all of that, because I've never been there before. So they offered to drive me around. They said, oh, don't worry, you just come there. We will drive you that night. So we went, measured up. It was pretty dark. They were already interested in dark skies, and they wanted me to meet up with the local government. Now, in our regular job, in my day job, we work with national governments. So working with the local government wasn't an issue for me because I know how we need the dialogue we need to have with them. So I went prepared. I did the measurements. I looked through the IDA accreditation rules and etc. We went to the meeting. All the local board council was there. And so I told them, you know, you are dark enough, you meet all the criteria, you could get a provisional rating if you like, and then that gives you 2 years to sort out, you know, the ordinances and what have you. And they said, oh, we don't like provisional rating, we want to go for the full rating. How soon can we do it? I said, well, if you're really committed, you can do it in 3 to 6 months. And that's what we did.
Which must be some sort of record for the program. I don't know what the quick it is, but it's many.
It was pretty quick. And my speciality within the dark sky thing is measuring the night sky. I have a pretty sophisticated way of measuring, and John Barentine said that was like the best thing he had got at the time. So that's what I used to do, and we got it over the line. But I think the significance of Great Barrier Island is it's very significant to New Zealand for another reason. Because the only other place in New Zealand that was a dark sky reserve was Aotea Mackenzie. This is a magnificent place. It has an observatory on the hilltop. It's got beautiful lakes. And they had taken, that was in 2012. So they had built up astrotourism. There was a high degree of awareness within New Zealand. Their tourism growth was 15% per annum, and it still continues. So this was a very well-known place. But the view within New Zealand was it was unique, it was special, it was a one-off, because to get it accredited, you had a University of Canterbury behind it, 15 PhDs, an observatory, a government minister, and they worked on it for like 3 years and got it over the line. So it was seen as a very difficult thing. So when Great Barrier Island got accredited, it sent some shockwaves through the system to think that, you know, two couples 6 months later could get this accreditation done. And that made a lot of people look up and say, we've got the Milky Way, we've got dark skies, we have very little street lights, why can't we get accredited? And that really created all this interest. In fact, Waiheke, and the 4th dark sky place, got accredited just last month, I think, or earlier this month. And I had a phone call yesterday, Ruskin, from a similar sized area up north. And the guy said, you know, I got this, you know, we got this piece of land, we have no street lights, we are really dark. We can do something like this place in Nelson, but the most important thing we have to do is to measure the darkness. So I stopped him there and asked him other questions, saying, okay, can you see the Milky Way? He said, yes. Can you see the Magellanic Clouds naked eye? He said, oh, easy, it's always there. Can you see Pleiades? How many stars in Pleiades can you see? He said, oh, I can see about 6 naked eye. I said, you know what? Don't waste your time measuring the darkness. It is dark enough. We can measure it later. Put your energy into the lighting ordinances. You know, you don't have street lights. Find out what, that is where your energy should go. Measuring is a piece of cake. And outreach, it's a village of 600 people or something, and they already share astrophotographs and whatever. I said, okay, work on your community and get the ordinances sorted out. But it's interesting how one dark sky place inspires another. And that's what happened with the Great Barrier Island. That was in 2017. And now we have 15 or so places, you know, working to become, we have the dark skies right through New Zealand. It's just that accreditation provides 2 things. One is it's like an objective external endorsement that they are dark, but most importantly, it protects it for future generations. So that's really the motivation for us.
So one of the things that struck me when I was traveling around New Zealand, is like when you get out, there's a tiny little airport on Great Barrier, and the first sign you see is a big sign that says, welcome to Great Barrier Island International Dark Sky Reserve. And when you're driving into Tekapo, the first sign you see is a sign that says, welcome to Aotea Mackenzie International Dark Sky reserve, and it just struck me that the sort of astrotourism and the ecotourism aspects of the night sky had been embraced by New Zealand, and not just by the private enterprises. These are small individuals and small businesses coming together and say, this is something unique and valuable, and we can figure out how to position this to bring people in. So I mean, a couple of questions. One is maybe you could comment on that, and then now that New Zealand is one of the sort of COVID-free places, and one of the ways you're staying COVID-free is by closing your borders. Now, how has that impacted the dark sky movement across the country?
Yeah, so just to step back, astrotourism has played a big role here. And that's because tourism, 20% of our foreign exchange earnings are from tourism. 15% of the population is employed one way or another within the tourism industry. It's a magnificently beautiful country, and tourism is an important player. 5%, 6% of our GDP is from tourism. So within tourism is where astrotourism fits in. And the beauty is it's ecotourism. New Zealanders on the whole are very, they like sustainability, they like conservation. So they're naturally that way inclined, and they see astrotourism as helping with that. And what you mustn't forget is it also embraces the cultural aspects of New Zealand, because Maori astronomy is a very deep and sophisticated astronomy. Celestial navigation is what brought people here. To be honest, I mean, Captain Cook didn't discover New Zealand, but he certainly put it on the world map. And what brought him to this part of the world was also astronomy. He came to observe the transit of Venus. Yeah. And then within months, he observed the transit of Mercury in New Zealand, which helped him to map New Zealand pretty accurately. So astronomy is in our foundations. It's in our blood in some ways. We have, I think, per capita maximum number of astronomers. There are 22 astronomical societies right around the country. So there is that already there. Tourism is again an established area. So this is the marrying of the two. And Tekapo, which was a sleepy little town, suddenly became a tourist mecca founded on astrotourism. And that gave the lead to other regions to realize, we are regional economies, there isn't much going on here, but if our skies are dark and we can build on tourism. So I'll give you a statistic. Great Barrier Island, they did a tourism survey, and 16% of the visitors to Great Barrier Island have now said they come there for the dark skies. So that's nearly a fifth, or a little bit lower than fifth, in just 2 years. 2017 they got accredited. So that sort of appreciation has helped. And it sort of fits in with where New Zealand wants to go with tourism and regional development. But with COVID, naturally, tourism has taken a hit. And the more established, sophisticated dark sky tourism outfits in Tekapo in particular have taken a hit. So, a couple of hotels are closed down, things have got quieter there. But the appreciation of dark skies by New Zealanders have shot through the roof. They're buying more telescopes. I run a charity that deals with this. They've had their record month in 20 years. We have got podcasts, we have got online programs, because we are promoting it as, you can't travel overseas or other places, but you can travel to the universe from your backyard. It's family friendly, it's lockdown friendly, and during lockdown, the night skies got darker because there was less pollution of every variety. Yeah. So the upside is there's a great appreciation of dark skies. The downside is there's a drop in overseas astrotourism. But the domestic, within New Zealand, we can move around really freely now. So, and the government's promoting domestic tourism. So I think the domestic tourists will keep these places going. And there's talk of trans-Tasman bubble with Australia, so we could get Australian tourists as well. So, you know.
So maybe we could end, I know you're also on the board of the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance, which is a strategic partner of the International Dark Sky Association. So maybe you could just share a few thoughts about how do you see the future of dark sky conservation in I won't say Australasia, but in Oceania, of which New Zealand is a leading part.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, I work through dark skies. I actually work with a little international network because we have a very good relationship with the cosmic campground, the growers. And between us, we do some dark sky research between the two dark sky sanctuaries. I work closely with the Welsh dark sky places, Eland Valley in particular. So I am familiar with those kinds of dark skies. But Australia and New Zealand and the Pacific have the largest areas of natural night skies. It's because, as we discussed earlier, low population density, less street lighting. So the skies are naturally dark. They may not be as protected, but they're naturally dark. So, but the number of IDA dark sky places have been very thin on the ground. New Zealand had one in 2012, and it took to 2017 to have the second one. Australia had Siding Spring in 2017 or 18. And only recently they've had the other two have come through. So they are very low on protecting the dark skies, but very long on having the dark skies. So the ADSA, Australasian Dark Sky Association, is there to promote light pollution, or reduce light pollution rather, and encourage more dark sky places. So that's where they are working to. And I think the future looks really good because we recently did an outreach program. Sometimes, necessity is the mother of invention. So having the lockdown meant we couldn't physically do outreach like we'd like to. So we created an outreach program. It was called World Record Light. We made it global. It was over a 24-hour period. So anyone in the world could take part. And to set a Guinness Book of Records, we needed 2,000 participants. That was our target. We ended up with 10,200 participants. A lot of them were school children and families with children. And it's really set the stage for a lot of, it was pitched at the beginners. There's a half an hour tutorial on reducing light pollution, what it is, what you can do. And then we had a measurement for globe at night. So the future looks really, really good. But there is a difference. I must mention this. There is a difference between the culture in Australia and in New Zealand. So Australian culture is to highlight the bad effects of light pollution and say how we can reduce it. The New Zealand approach, which I have fostered and is working, is the spotlight is on the starlight, not on artificial light. Yeah. So it's to say, gosh, we got this starlight, how wonderful it is. And this artificial light is trying to spoil it for us. And if we reduce it, we can lock it up for the future. And that seems to be working at our end.
Well, that's a great point to end this conversation on. And I'd love to, well, first say thank you, Nalayini, for sharing your thoughts here. And I'd love to open it up to, I guess, some supporters. And what questions do you have about the journey Nalayini has been on and what's going on in New Zealand and, opportunities to engage?